And we are live. In a huge win for free speech, a circuit court struck down a challenge of a Texas law that seeks to prevent big tech censorship. Heartland Government Relations Director Cameron Sholty is going to be joining us to talk to us about this victory. Also, Biden says the pandemic is over. We say duh, but many others are angry. We're going to be talking about this and more in episode 364 of the In the Tank podcast. All right, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, we've got a full crew. We've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing very well, despite the news that I heard this week that because of a carbon dioxide shortage, of all things, that there could be huge spike in prices of beer around the country. But yeah, I know. I want all my friends to know that I'm okay. I'm well stocked, but I understand the entire state of Wisconsin is on suicide watch right now.
Does that mean that we have to start turning on all the coal plants to get some new carbon dioxide emissions? Do we have to save the planet by resorting back to fossil fuels? I think that's what's going to happen.
If you could sell carbon dioxide capture as a way to make beer prices go down, I bet you could get the entire country to get behind it.
That's right.
I think we need a strategic beer reserve.
Oh, I think you're right. I think it's past time for that.
We Wisconsinites, we're going to make a run on Corbell to get us through the next 9 months of winter.
Those clever remarks are from Cameron Sholty. He is our Director of Government Relations here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing well. Always glad to join you guys.
Oh, yeah. It's once in a blue moon you join us, but you always bring some interesting insights. So I'm excited to talk to you about our main topic. Also joining us, Chris Talgo, Senior Editor at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
Okay, I'm a little sad. It seems that summer's over here in the Chicagoland area, so I'm a little bummed.
You got the flannel shirt on. You're already full swing when it comes to embracing the fall.
Isn't
today like the first official day of fall? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect timing.
Chris is probably burning a pumpkin candle in his office already. Has his comfy, cozy socks on.
That's right.
Listening to his Indigo Girls.
Making s'mores, you know.
So we have a lot to cover today, but before we do, I always have that message at the beginning of the episode for those people that are listening to the audio-only version of the show, which is the majority of our listeners. And I encourage you to join us a day earlier on Thursday at noon Central Time. You can watch us streaming on Facebook and Twitter and Rumble and YouTube. You can join the conversation, put your comments and questions in the feed. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. So who do we got who's here today? Who's joining us? I see Janice. I see TM Willemsa. I see Gary in the chat. Jason, Abel Windsor, Cowboy Ray Rogers, a lot of our standard crew here. So I'm excited to see what you guys have to say about some of our topics.
Happy early birthday to TM Willemsa.
Oh, nice insight there. That's great. The only other thing of house cleaning that we should mention right off the bat is reference to that little postcard that is above Jim's shoulder there, because we have a benefit dinner upcoming, 28th annual Heartland Institute benefit dinner featuring Yeomi Park, who is a North Korean defector and activist. She will be joining us for our benefit dinner taking place on, October 21st, I think. That's a Friday. Tickets are on sale. You can go to heartland.org. There'll be a little banner thing or some type of little featured image you can click on, or you can go to benefit.heartland.org for information and tickets and all that type of stuff. We'll all be there surely. So if you're a constant listener of the show and you're in the area, you want to join us, maybe you will see our faces in real life. Jim, any other things that we should talk about before we kind of jump into some of our topics here?
No, that'll do it. I really do hope that a lot of you, especially if you're a listener in the Chicagoland area, that you will come to our benefit dinner because it's going to be a fantastic, unforgettable night with Yeonmi Park. I mean, her story of escape from North Korea is going to change your life. It really will. And it's also a great way to help support the Heartland Institute and this podcast. So, and again, as Donnie said, to meet us in person. So I hope to see a lot of you there.
Absolutely. All right, so let's there's been before we get into our main topic, there's been a story that's been kind of going around, and it has to do with potential 2024 presidential candidate Ron DeSantis. Maybe I'm talking out of turn when it comes to that, but he's been in a little bit of a news cycle because he did I don't know how to describe it, a stunt where he had 50 migrants transported up to Martha's Vineyard to see how they're going to deal with the situation. And it's been a kind of an interesting evolving story. Jim, you probably know a little bit more about this than I. Do you want to take it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we actually, you asked, should we talk about this on the podcast this week? I'm like, yeah, that's kind of old news. But it's not, because it's an ongoing story, I think. So I think we should address it. I mean, so DeSantis has decided, and the governor of Texas as well, Greg Abbott, has decided, well, all of you preening liberals in your so-called sanctuary cities, while cities like El Paso and other border towns in Texas are being inundated by thousands of human refugees, of illegal immigrants every single day. Hey, how about you sanctuary cities that are highly populated and very well funded? Help us out and deal with some of these people. So they started flying these illegal immigrants up to places like Chicago.
Signaling.
Right,
Instead of just virtue signaling, why don't you actually try it out a little bit?
Yeah, let's see if there's some cattle under that hat, as they might say in Texas. And so so Ron DeSantis started calling it, I think we should call these, freedom flights, getting these people into cities like Chicago. So I think Texas sent a busload of illegal immigrants into Chicago. And our mayor Lori Lightfoot, was very upset about this, publicly reprimanded the Texas governor for doing such a thing. Meanwhile, Chicago is a sanctuary city. It passes, probably passed 17 resolutions in the Trump administration alone, decrying the so-called inhumane treatment by the Trump administration of illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, the situation on the border is much worse than now. We still have kids in cages, only now we have more kids in more cages, and they're even more overrun than they were during the Trump administration. And so she got really upset about it. And so what is the first thing she did? She put them on a bus and shipped them to a rich, leafy suburb of Chicago instead, so she wouldn't have to deal with them anymore. And and so when that was last week's headline, or early last week's headline, and then Ron DeSantis said, "You know what, Governor Abbott, hold my beer," and he sent a plane of 50 immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, another sanctuary community, probably the most leftist place in the United States, full of virtue signalers, full of white people, almost exclusively white. Barack Obama is very much in a minority with his $12 million estate on that island. And so he sent them there. And what happened, as people listening to this podcast probably already know, they didn't last 50 hours on that on that island of Martha's Vineyard. And then they called in the military to get them out of there. And they shipped them off to a military base on Cape Cod. And so it was like a complete panic that they sent 50 Venezuelan immigrants up there to Martha's Vineyard. And they didn't last 2 days, and they shipped them out. So, a lot of people were joking, maybe we should put the people of Martha's Vineyard in charge of our immigration policy, and then we'd have it under control, because they act fast, man. And they are pretty brutal about what they're going to do, because they don't want you here. They move you out.
Well, what's so distorting about like the media, the news cycle, and all of that is the first story that I heard about, in regards to all of this, when they actually arrived, these buses arrived, was this outpouring of help from the people of Martha's Vineyard, and they came with care packages, and they all banded together to help these poor, distraught people. And that's been the narrative on social media from this point on. You talked about how they didn't last 48 hours. They're put on buses. The military helped get them out of there or whatever. if you were to ask your average leftist or anything, just like consuming the media that they see on social media or anything like that, they're like, no, they all banded together and helped. That's the narrative that they're spinning over there.
Well, they did band together and help. They banded together to help get them off their island.
Yeah, you won't hear about that part.
No.
Chris, this was originally your idea to talk about this, so feel free to throw in your 2 cents about any angle of this story.
Okay, so this fiscal year, we've had 2 million people cross the border illegally. Ron DeSantis flies 50 people to Martha's Vineyard, and this is the reaction that they take. It just goes to show that these people are not serious. But Donnie, this is a new development that I want to share with everybody. George Soros has helped them to fund a lawsuit against the governor of Florida for causing dizziness, for causing no kidding, for causing dizziness, for giving them $10 gift certificates to McDonald's when there are no McDonald's on Martha's Vineyard, and a host of other crimes against humanity. So they are seeking, as far as I know, $75,000 per person who was flown to Martha's Vineyard, courtesy of Ron DeSantis, on a private jet, after he put them up in a hotel for 4 days, fed them, clothed them, treated them like royalty. So their lives are infinitely better off because of this. However, they are suing on behalf of a George Soros funded lawyer based on the fact that they have been treated akin to the way that Jews were treated during
oh my
Nazi.
God, of course that has to be
No,
brought up in
don't-
every
no,
every
because-
conversation.
I gotta tell you, as a guy who travels, touchdown and leave in 44 hours, that's quick turnaround. That's going to make anybody dizzy. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good point.
But Donnie, the only reason I bring up that parallel is because that's what all the talking heads on MSNBC and CNN have been comparing this to.
Yeah, of course they have. That doesn't surprise me at all. Cameron, we did not bring you on to talk about Martha's Vineyard, but if you have any comments about this other than glib remarks, feel free.
As a guy involved in politics, I ooze glib remarks, but I'll save those for people who are much better looking and smarter than I am.
Jim, feel free to touch on this, but then we should get to our last topic.
We should, but some of these, I have a couple points more to make on this. Lori Lightfoot and others on the left, other Democrats, have accused Ron DeSantis of being guilty of human trafficking. I believe he's actually under no joke. I believe there's actually a criminal investigation against him for supposedly kidnapping these 50 Venezuelan immigrants and then trafficking them to the most wonderful place to be on earth, pretty much in the United States, especially this time of year. Martha's Vineyard, of course, is the retreat, the summer retreat of the uber wealthy on the East Coast. It is off season. Most people have left now. They literally have thousands and thousands of beds to house people yet. And they're a sanctuary city. Now, if you're a sanctuary city, you're supposed to be welcoming to immigrants, right? These are the people who have the signs that, I believe in science and hate has no home here. And humans are not illegal, all that stuff. But when it comes down to it, when they can just extend a couple of days of support for these people that are sent there they can't even last a couple of days. They were working to get them off of there as soon as they landed. And it's the hypocrisy, of course, is enormous on this. And it just goes to show that, it's easy to virtue signal from your top one half of 1% lifestyle when none of this ever affects you. And the point, people are calling it a political stunt. The reason it was done, I'm comfortable calling it a political stunt because it worked. And what it did was focus the whole country was talking about this, focus the nation's attention on what is a real humanitarian crisis on our border. And it exists because this administration wants it to happen. And, to put that right in the faces of Biden's strongest supporters at Martha's Vineyard, I think serves a really good purpose. Another couple points here is actually the people of the United States are behind this idea of sending illegal immigrants to sanctuary cities that have volunteered to handle these people, right? That's why you're a sanctuary city. You're not going to turn them into the feds. We welcome illegal immigrants here. a poll just came out. CRC research. It was commissioned by National Review. 63% of likely voters agreed that sanctuary cities should share the burden of the 2 million illegals that have crossed the border in just the last 2 years. Even 51% of Democrats think that's a good idea. And then one last point, a lot was made. Oh, yeah, well, actually 2 points. These immigrants from Venezuela actually came across the border in Texas. The federal government shipped them from Texas to Florida. So they were already human trafficked. They were already trafficked as human beings by the Biden administration. And so I guess Biden would be a co-conspirator in this criminal conspiracy that he's going to be facing charges for. I don't know. But look, and then there's a big difference. See, Venezuela, you can come to the United States and just cross the border at a proper place and apply for political asylum in the United States. I believe Venezuela is a country that qualifies for that because it's a socialist hellhole, which, that's another discussion about socialism on the rise everywhere, especially the United States. But Venezuela is an oppressive socialist hellhole, and you should be able to apply for asylum in the United States if you manage to escape. The problem is the lack of actual proper border enforcement has our system completely overwhelmed by millions and millions of people who do not have a legitimate asylum application to make the United States. So then you have these Venezuelans that are just kind of stuck in limbo. And if we had an immigration policy that was handled in a proper way, we'd be able to handle asylum seekers. And so, the left is using these Venezuelans saying like, look, these are legitimate immigrants. Yeah, they are. But there are millions and millions who are not, that have overwhelmed the system, which causes these sorts of things to happen. So, if it's human trafficking, what DeSantis did, then Mayor Lori Lightfoot is also guilty of human trafficking by just, without telling anybody, just shipping them off to Burr Ridge, I think is the wealthy suburb here in Chicago. And so is the Biden administration. For people brought this up before. The Biden administration has flown illegal immigrants all over the country on flights in the middle of the night. This has been going on for months, yet it's only when DeSantis makes a wonderful and timely political point that now it becomes a criminal investigation. Our entire system is corrupt and broken. And that's why I think this story actually, in a kind of funny way, really exemplifies that.
Oh, and Donnie, I think the reason that DeSantis did it and Abbott also is because they wanted to bring the issue into the forefront of the American public, because the mainstream media is not reporting on this one iota. The only reporter who's been down at the border consistently for the past 18 months reporting on what's happening there is Bill Melugin of Fox News. And hey, guess what? The White House is incensed with the fact that he's actually reporting on that. They've also shut down Fox News drones that show what's happening along the border because they want to keep this stuff a secret. That's why Kamala Harris has not been there. AOC has not been there. They do not want to bring attention to it. And this was a smart political move by the governors of Texas and Florida, because by simply sending 50 people to a liberal enclave in the Northeast where, the mainstream media is basically located, they have brought this to the attention of the people. So I think it was a win.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
Just to end cap this, to kind of put a cherry on this issue, I think what most people were frustrated about is how quickly the folks of Martha's Vineyard said, we don't have the resources to accommodate and to provide for these migrants. And in one picture, I saw in the news coverage, in one picture, there is a brand new, very large home being built. And this should have been an issue that was embraced. It was what DeSantis and Abbott have been doing, is providing perfect Marxism for them, right? This was from each, according to their means, to each, from each according to their needs, to each according to their means, right? So DeSantis and Abbott were providing these migrants opportunities in the United States that even the four of us do not have. And it was just such blatant hypocrisy. And I think that's what is kind of underlying that poll that Jim referenced in National Review is just people see this as why does El Paso, Texas have to bear this burden? Why does Del Rio, Texas have to bear this burden? And if anybody's ever been to Jacksonville, Florida, why does Jacksonville have to bear this burden? I'm kidding for anybody watching. But David Hoyt, our staff in Jacksonville, knows that I tease him relentlessly about being Jacksonvillian.
I know we're going to move on. Just one last point. The reason that they were turned around as quickly as humanly possible out and gotten out of Martha's Vineyard, because every minute that they remained in Martha's Vineyard increased the danger that more would be sent. They did this so fast because there's no way they were going to handle any more than the ones that they got. And they were pretty horrified that the ones that arrived even arrived. But every minute, if they said, okay, we'll set up some cots in the community center, somebody calls Subway and get, 50 Subway sandwiches in here, we'll take care of them for the night. If they did something like that, they would be actually living up to their sanctuary city status, but also inviting more. There is no way they were ever going to put up with more. And, I hope there's another plane with 100 of them on next time and see how that goes.
It's easy to virtue signal when you're not actually feeling the impact of any of the things that you're virtue signaling about. All right. We spent way too much time on that. We got to get to our main topic here. We brought Cameron on for a reason. So for those of you who are unaware, big tech censorship has been a big topic for the Heartland Institute for the past 2-3 years, maybe longer. Ever since having a kid, I have no concept of time anymore. So we have a big win to talk about today out of Texas, or at least it started in Texas. So we'll get to that. We'll definitely get to that. But I want to go back in time a little bit and set the stage for this discussion. So what started all of this? So again, going back several years, definitely kind of starting in the Trump years, I want to say, that there was a bunch of stories coming out of social media blocking, shadow banning conservatives being banned outright, YouTube channels being demonetized. I think Steven Crowder was one of the big ones of that, just based on conservative stuff that he was saying. His channels were being demonetized. Amazon refusing to sell certain books, Twitter and Facebook banning President Trump from their platforms. Reddit quarantined the Trump subreddit just because they were pro-Trump, basically. The Hunter laptop story being crushed before the election. And all of those things have nothing to do with the crackdown on anything that was counter to the corporate media's portrayal of the COVID pandemic. And there's a million different examples of that. And I mean, at this point, I feel like the evidence is so overwhelming. Like I literally made that list of things that I just listed off just based on memory. So I know that there's so many more stories that revolve around this conservative speech being censored by social media. And I kind of wonder if we can find an exhaustive list of all the examples of conservative speech being squashed by social media. I don't know if Andy in the background, you want to look for something like that. But are there any other specific examples that come to mind that I didn't mention or maybe didn't give enough attention to? Maybe in the chat, anyone can throw in their suggestions or
trying to count out the examples is like trying to count the grains of sand on a Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, well, that's what
beach.
I'm saying. There's just so many. I just wonder if there is like an exhaustive list. I'm not sure, but
you should go. Our friends at the Media Research Center have a lot of that information. So mrc.org. Yeah. Everyone should go visit there.
Let's see. So, like, I know I've mentioned this before, but to me, the most important repercussion of this type of thing is it's actually more like widespread than you can even imagine. I've mentioned this before, but I think it bears repeating. And that's an anecdote that we have from Chris, who pitches a lot of our op-eds here at our organization. And he has heard from friendly publications saying like, yeah, we're not going to take any of your climate change stuff. We agree with it, maybe even, but we're not going to take it because if this gets shared on our social media, then it could result in it being flagged, and that could trigger an algorithm that would reduce the reach of all of our media that's on social media, that would affect our website and all of that stuff. So this chilling effect that's being caused by social media is more widespread and might be having effects on content that you didn't even know existed. So, I mean, it kind of shows the importance of not relying on social media for news and information. Sorry, this is a little side tangent, but it illustrates just how important it is to go regularly to sites like heartland.org or heartlanddailynews.com or climaterealism.com or anything like that. So anyways, all of this caused this big debate to go on about social media and their role when it comes to censoring things. So this whipped up quite a debate, like I said, not just in general, but specifically on like the broader like right side of the aisle. So you had plenty of conservatives that were mad that this was happening, calling it unfair, some abuse of power, demanding something be done to balance the scales. However, there's plenty of libertarian and limited government types who reacted to these stories by saying, well, it's a private company. They can do whatever they want. If you don't like it, build your own social media company. And it's also worth noting that when conservatives did create their own social media company, Amazon, Apple, and Google nuked it from space. That's a side point. And then we even had a guy from Cato. Was it Cato? We had a guy on from Cato who was brought on to like the censorship governance board and he was brought on basically to give the illusion that Facebook was being fair in its censoring ways. So I feel like we were one of the first national think tanks that really identified this as a problem and like took a stance like rigidly against it. Jim, you're our communications guy. Am I speaking out of turn there? Am I giving us too much credit?
No, I think that's right. I mean, we were one of the charter members of, I mentioned the Media Research Center before. They put together a free speech alliance, and we were one of the charter members of that organization. We were talking to them as they were thinking of forming it. I think it was back, was it 3 years ago now? Because we started to see, even before the censorship of right-leaning viewpoints being censored on social media was even really a thing. And of course, it all related to the 2020 election. And actually, everything goes back to Trump being elected, because the social media companies will never forgive themselves for allowing Trump to be, for allowing the people of the United States to select Donald Trump as their president. They will never forgive themselves for that, because they think they didn't do enough to stop this fascist from taking power in the White House. And they're just all, so they've never really gotten over that. And that's really the underlying emotional, being on the left means always being in close touch to your emotions. And they've never really gotten over that emotional hurt that they had from letting Trump be elected president. And so, but we saw huge drops in our ability or our reach on Facebook many years ago, about the time yet again of another election season. This was actually it was in the 2016 election. We were nice and we were hopping along with our impact and reach and stuff on Facebook. I still have the chart on the side of on the wall here in my office, and then it just dropped off a cliff about 3 weeks before the election. So this has been going on for a long time. We actually shared that chart with our friends at Media Research Center, and that's kind of helped get the ball rolling, because people wanted evidence of this happening. And we just looked it up and said, yeah, it's been weird. And it's funny, but this is all just intensified. And, what's great is that, this is where I'll just hand it off to Cameron, I think, is that the Heartland Institute, we are a think tank that works a lot with state legislators. We are a national think tank, but kind of for the 38 years we've been in existence, we've really focused on kind of being staff support for your local and your state legislature. And we started working with them and telling them, people think that big tech censorship is too big. We can't do anything about it. I'm just a state legislator in Kansas or Texas or Florida. What can I do to fight Facebook and Twitter suppressing the speech of my constituents? Well, Cameron Sholty and our government relations department said there's actually a lot you can do. Ain't that right, Cameron?
There is. Thanks. So I was just double checking our numbers on this. There were, as of this spring, there were about 82 bills introduced in 35 states that sought to rein in big tech. And those bills took myriad forms. Texas has provided a private cause of action. Florida's allowed the state to kind of regulate social media in a way that they'd have to disclose certain algorithms. Utah actually passed a bill, but was vetoed by Governor Cox there. Some of the other states, they took different tacks, or they took an all of the above approach. One of my personal favorites were bills that would cancel state contracts with any big tech company, any big tech firm that censored or deplatformed or demonetized users. So, for example, in Mississippi, they introduced legislation that would have canceled a contract they had with Amazon for a big, huge server farm that they had. But that bill, many of these bills didn't go anywhere. Well, I won't say they didn't go anywhere, but what happened was a lot of the wind was taken out of the sails by this was a lot of the wind was taken out of the sails by the litigation surrounding the Florida legislation and the Texas legislation. The Texas legislation is now colloquially known as HB 20. If you mention it to a lawyer, HB 20 or Net Choice v. Paxton, whom Net Choice being the trade association or the trade group for the big tech firms, Twitter, Amazon, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. So yeah, that's kind of sets the stage, as it were, for what was going on out in the States and what we were seeing. We found ourselves basically crisscrossing the country. Samantha in my shop, myself, James Taylor, the president, crisscrossing the country, chasing Net Choice and Net Choice chasing us, testifying to legislators. And what's interesting, I just pulled up some of my notes. This is what my notes when I testify on a bill look like. This is how you have to stay on top of this. This is how the issue can evolve in the 2 hours that you'll have a committee hearing. And so you're scribbling notes, trying to keep track of all the crazy things that big tech will say to convince a legislator to not work on this issue or to not pass their bills. And there were nuggets. You would get lobbyists for big tech that would basically come out and say, and one comes to mind in Michigan, working on a bill that would have reined in big tech. It was very, very similar to Texas's legislation. You basically had the lobbyist for big tech come out and say, yeah, we can take down whatever we want. The Section 230, the law that Congress gave us that kind of oversees us, we can take anything we want down for whatever reason we so choose, because Section 230 says if it's lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, we can censor it. And so built into their terms of service and their community standards, basically anything that's conservative has been deemed otherwise objectionable.
Right. Yeah, and I want to get specifically into like the Texas law and how it was challenged and what the result of that was. But Chris, I mean, I know that you watch the mainstream media so that we don't have to, and you watch the CNNs and the MSNBCs of the world and Fox and left or right, whatever you consume. When this debate was kind of raging at its height, what was the argument in favor of like big tech being these arbiters that could censor at any type of whim? Because it seems to me, at least in the things that I read, and generally, again, that's kind of from the right side of the aisle, that it's always like, oh, no, free speech. They could do whatever they want. They're protected by free speech. They're a private company. They could do whatever they want. They can censor anything. Is that what like the CNNs and the MSNBCs of the world were saying too? Do you recall?
Yeah, they definitely are. Like Joe Scarborough and the CNNs of the world do argue, well, they're a private company, so they can do whatever they want. And if you don't, abide by their rules of service, well, then too bad for you. They can cancel you. But I also think that they did take a stance that, well, what these conservative people are saying, whether it's about the election or about the vaccine or about lockdowns or school closures or whatever over the past few years, well, that should be censored. They claimed. So
right.
They were constantly in agreement with what Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whomever was censoring, because it happened to align with their philosophy and their ideology. So they wanted to have it both ways.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. So Cameron, this lawsuit that we're going to talk about kind of centers around specifically the Texas law. Is that just like kind of the most wide-ranging attack on tech censorship that there exists, or is it just like the biggest venue, or why is this kind of like the center of this whole judicial process?
Sure. So Texas, Florida, and Utah all passed bills that sought to rein in big tech, right? Florida's was immediately sued and enjoined by a federal district court, but Net Choice sued to stop that. Utah's bill was vetoed by their governor, citing constitutional concerns. And then when Texas passed theirs, Net Choice also sued to stop that. And Texas's law, HB 20, was then enjoined by the district court there. AG Paxton then appealed the injunction to the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans. And the Fifth Circuit said, yeah, no, this bill's good, this law is good, and we're going to lift the injunction. We're going to lift the stay. Net Choice then appealed straight up to the Supreme Court of the United States, where the Supreme Court basically lifted the stay and said, no, the bill cannot go into effect pending resolution of lower courts. So then last week, Friday, a week ago tomorrow, the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans lifted that stay and issued a 150-ish page opinion, basically eviscerating Net Choice's legal arguments that they have a First Amendment right to censor. And basically that's the thrust of their argument, is Net Choice and Big Tech feels they have, despite Congress declaring them platforms, they feel they have a right to censor because as a private company, they enjoy certain First Amendment free speech protections. We filed an amicus brief in that, actually, as a matter of fact, and the courts cited us, actually, which was kind of exciting for us. But nonetheless, the Fifth Circuit eviscerated Net Choice's legal arguments, or Big Tech's legal arguments, saying, no, you either have to choose. You are either a platform or you're a publisher, but you cannot be both.
Yeah, right. And that's the heart of the matter, and I know that we've talked about this in length before, but again, this is one of those things that bears repeating. Section 230, the idea that these social media companies are supposed to be open platforms, not publishers. And because they're open platforms, they're given this special protection that prevents them from being sued for what some random person posts on that site, the way that publishers could be held liable. However, when a company starts censoring things based on political rhetoric or just whatever they just don't want to have on their site, now they cross that line into publisher territory. And you should lose, when you do that, lose your liability protection. And this is like that part of the debate that I think like even people left or right of the aisle are unaware of. They're unaware of this nuance when they're talking about what private companies can do, at least back in the early days of the conversation. But like that to me is the most important part.
Well, Donnie, you bring up a good point, because when I remember messaging with Jim on this issue when it first broke, and I was, before I fully appreciated the issue, I wasn't entirely comfortable weighing in, saying, hey, wait, these are private actors. I'm not so sure that we should be weighing in on this issue, because don't interactive websites like Facebook and Twitter, for example, have a First Amendment right to remove content? Sure they do. But then they're the Washington Post. And then they're the New York Times, and then they're and then they're subject to libel laws. But that's not the protection Section 230 in Congress gave them. So they have to pick a side, and that's what the federal courts have told them. And this is going to SCOTUS. This is Justice Clarence Thomas has basically been asking for this lawsuit for several years now, because Texas came in and said, you're a common carrier. The Texas law said, you're a common carrier, and we're going to treat you like common carrier. You cannot discriminate. You cannot censor your users for viewpoint, for what they're expressing, not necessarily content, but for viewpoint. And so what you have here is Texas came in and said, you're going to be AT&T. You're going to be an electric utility for the purposes of free speech and people sharing ideas, because 97% of all social media traffic flows through Twitter, Instagram, and now TikTok. But 97% of all social media traffic flows through three firms.
Yeah,
Donnie,
I like when you bring up. So I'll go to you, Chris, in 1 second. But I like when you bring up like the energy carriers. Like, could you imagine like people running to these like energy companies and defending their right to shut off energy to some house because they don't like the Trump sign in their front yard? It would be ridiculous.
Guaranteed. Look, the Heartland Institute's offices we're in occupied territory, right? I mean, if they could shut our offices down, they would have by now.
Yeah. Chris, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think this is also part of a bigger debate happening in the country right now about free speech. I think in the past few years, people are starting to dismiss the notion of free speech, and especially I think younger people are saying, well, if it's hate speech or if it offends somebody, then it should be able to be banned, and that's not free speech. Free speech is very black and white. You either have it or you don't. There is we have some free speech for some stuff, but we don't have free speech for other stuff. So I think this is like, like a line in the sand that must be drawn. The United States of America was founded upon freedom of speech. You are allowed to say what you think. And, it doesn't matter if these technologies have the ability to censor it or not. This is, I think, just a part of a much larger societal conversation that we are having and need to have. In which are you allowed to say what you think, even if it might hurt some people's feelings, or even if it might, not, walk the line with what people want you to say. I think this is much larger than just big tech censorship.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and just keep that in mind when I read some of the responses to this the lawsuit decision that was granted, because some of it's ridiculous. But I just want to read some of the statements in the aftermath of this decision. So the majority statement says. So this is actual from like the judges that ruled on this. In urging such sweeping relief, the platforms offer a rather odd inversion of the First Amendment, the court's majority decision said. That amendment, of course, protects every person's right to the freedom of speech, but the platforms argue that buried somewhere in the person's enumerated right to free speech lies a corporation's enumerated right to muzzle speech. So that was a pretty powerful statement from the circuit court. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's statement, this was on Twitter. He put, breaking, I just secured a massive victory for the Constitution and free speech in federal court. Hashtag big tech cannot censor the political voices of any Texan. The Fifth Circuit rejects the idea that corporations have a freewheeling First Amendment right to censor what people say. And then Net Choice, the losers of this court decision, said in a statement, we are disappointed that the Fifth Circuit split decision undermines the First Amendment protections and creates a circuit split with the unanimous decision of the 11th Circuit. We remain convinced that when the U.S. Supreme Court hears one of our cases, it will uphold the First Amendment rights of websites, platforms, and apps. So, of course, they're disappointed because they're losers of this decision. And but to reference some, come on, people, you got to laugh at these things. There's been.
Well, I'll tell you what, Donnie, about Net Choice. Net Choice is a free market organization, or at least purportedly, and on 95% of all other issues, chances are we're going to agree with them. But the circuit court did get this right, and the fact of the matter is, and this kind of alludes to Chris, and maybe putting a finer point on Chris's remarks. Free speech is not subject to corporate capture, right? And generally speaking, though, corporations should be able to be allowed to transact themselves how they so choose. But in this case, they're operating within the framework of Section 230, and they have been given a liability gift and free from their editorial decisions, or liability a gift free of their editorial decisions. And they want to have their cake and to eat it too. And the court said, no, you're either going to be able to be sued or you're not, but you're not going to get to game the judicial system. And you're not going to get to game public policy just to ensure that you have this narrative. And now we find out, and I'm going to go on a rant, and I'm sorry, but you now have the Missouri and Louisiana attorneys general suing big tech, and we're finding out this level of heretofore unseen collusion between the Biden administration and big tech to actually muzzle people. It is in black and white. It is there in pixels and pen for everyone to see how the Biden administration and big tech colluded. And that only just further bolsters our point and will probably actually put wind back in the sails where I think you're going to see the wings of big tech flipped by state lawmakers all over the country.
Yeah.
So there's one more reaction that I want to read, and this is from Vox. So if you're unfamiliar with Vox, they are one of the most left-leaning rags on the internet. But their response to this, the title is kind of revealing. The title of this article is "Two Republican Judges Just Let Texas Seize Control of Twitter and Facebook." I mean, I would love to see that, that headline fact-checked, but that's their headline they actually ran with. And the reading from the article, it says an especially right-wing panel of an already conservative United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit handed down an astonishing opinion on Friday, effectively holding that the state of Texas may seize control of content moderation at major social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Now, the Fifth Circuit is attempting to permanently reinstate the law. Its latest opinion, which explains why the court sided with Texas's law, is exceedingly difficult to square with the longstanding First Amendment law. Indeed, it turns that law on its head, holding that the government may force private companies, or at least large private social media companies, to publish content that the companies do not wish to host. So that statement alone is just completely in contradiction to all that Section 230 stuff that I was talking about. It just ignores all of that. In fact, I bet if you control find Section 230, it doesn't mention it in this article at all. The Texas law is potentially an existential threat to the social media industry. Its supposed anti-censorship provisions are so strict that it would likely prevent the major social media platforms from removing content touting Nazism or white supremacy, or even from blocking social media users who engage in campaigns of harassment against others. Jim, I'm going to go to you because this just seems... The idea of labeling something existential threat is just like candy nowadays. You could just label that on anything. But the idea that some loser on Twitter is going to be talking about how they're a white supremacist and that's an existential threat to Twitter is so mind-numbingly ridiculous. I think only you can put it into words.
You said so many things in reading that story and the other comments that triggered me. I'm having trouble getting my thoughts organized because there's so many things to react to there. First of all, none of this would be happening to our social media giants if they adhered to two words in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Those two words are good faith. They have never acted, and this goes back to the 2016 election where they were arguably acting in good faith by allowing all sorts of political speech because they are a platform, not a publisher. But they did not act in good faith, which is why they did not act in good faith. People on the right had their constitutionally protected speech violated repeatedly. And as Cameron mentioned, with the coordination of government actors, when a private company acts in direct coordination with a government agency, like say the CDC or Fauci or the White House, they are actually then government actors. So they are actually violating the First Amendment as a private entity because they're working in concert with a government agency. So that's first off. But none of this would be happening if they acted in good faith, but they couldn't do it because big tech is dominated by radical leftists and they cannot. And if you know anything about the left, they don't want to debate anything. They just want to order what's truth and ban what they consider not truth, which is anything that opposes them and their agenda. And this case came down, what they call HR 20 in Texas was relatively simple and straightforward. It required tech companies to provide equal access to equal access to conservatives to their platforms. And it's that way because Twitter and Facebook and the comments on YouTube and all the big tech giants were engaging in viewpoint discrimination. And again, it's not that they want to be either a publisher or a platform. They want to be a publisher when it suits their ideological purposes, and they want to be a platform when it suits their ideological purposes. And so the argument that NetChoice made, and Cameron had pointed that out, and the Vox story pointed this out, supposedly this decision or that law violates the free speech rights of a private entity like Facebook or Twitter, right? It would, if they were actually a publisher and defined as such in the law, and we're not enjoying the special protections that they get under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. It'd be like a newspaper, and you can't force, like, say, well, I think there's a case law on this involving the Miami Herald. You can't force a newspaper to publish something it doesn't want to.
Sure.
Why? Because it is a private entity and has the right to choose what to publish and what not to publish. These social media giants are platforms, and they are protected by the law because they are supposed to allow and have a good faith effort to allow all viewpoints to be shared on their platforms. They have not done that. They brought this upon themselves. So if we are seeing the end of social media as we know it in the United States and around the world, good, because social media as it is right now around the world is discriminatory, and it violates the free speech rights of half of this country.
Yeah.
Real quick. Wait, Cameron,
Yeah.
real quick. Just for the potential that we'll have time to talk about our last story, I'm going to give you final word on this topic, and that starts now. Go ahead.
Jim, your point was the landmark Supreme Court case that said, yes, the newspapers are publishers and they have free speech rights as New York Times or Sullivan v. New York Times. Landmark case. And that case actually was cited extensively by NetChoice. And then the other case was about the gay pride parade in Boston, where they felt the organizers of the parade felt that they could prohibit homosexual police from participating in the parade, and NetChoice leaned heavily on that case. And in the judges in the Fifth Circuit, citing us, we didn't use this phrase, but citing our legal arguments, basically said what they're calling was, quote, ridiculous switcheroo, basically saying, have your cake, eat it too. So that's what we're going to see, or that's what we're seeing, and this case is going to go to the Supreme Court.
Any timeline on that?
Thirsty for it.
Do you think any timeline for that? Are we talking like years from now? Are we talking about months from now? You have any idea?
Well, on this particular case, there's not so much as litigation and discovery involved. So as a process, this case may already be ripe for SCOTUS review, and you could see him take oral arguments or hear oral arguments possibly as soon as the spring.
All right, so we got 8 minutes. I want to talk about this, so I'm not making a lie out of my thumbnail. President Joe Biden did a 60 Minutes interview recently. Andy, ready this next clip here, where he said a bunch of dumb stuff, as you would expect Joe Biden to say. But one of the things that he said, I thought was very uncontroversial. Let's go ahead and play that clip too, Andy.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And so I think it's changing, and I think this is a perfect example of it.
So again, didn't think that was very controversial. Moved on with my life. When someone suggested that we do this, that we talk about this, so I started looking it up, and there was just a slew of articles of people very upset at President Joe Biden and those remarks. One of those articles was from the New York Times. Biden says the pandemic is over, but at least 400 people are dying daily. It starts off with the statement that 400 to 500 Americans are dying every day of COVID-19. Goes through a list of examples of people that recently died from COVID.
No, they're dying with COVID, not of COVID.
Right. It also says, to begin with, the president does not have the authority to announce the end of a pandemic. The World Health Organization, an arm of the United Nations, designated the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic in 2020. If anyone is responsible for declaring an end, experts say it should be the organization and its director general, Dr. Tedros, whatever his name is. They were very personally insulted, the New York Times seemed to be, by President Joe Biden's statement that the pandemic is over. Chris, I shortchanged you at the end of the last topic, so I'll give you first swing on this issue.
All right, I got a couple thoughts on this. So first of all, I used to be a big fan of 60 Minutes. I thought they were one of the best news magazines in the country, and they, over the past couple of years, have just become, talking heads for the Democratic Party. So it doesn't surprise me that this interview was just full of softball questions by Scott Pelley. But Donnie, I think we also need to understand that Joe Biden has a tendency to say something, and then minutes, if not sometimes minutes, hours and days later, the White House walks them back. So this did not surprise me that much. But as Cameron brought up earlier in our conversation, Joe Biden is walking a fine line because many of his policies, whether it's still masking kids in Head Start or the student loan forgiveness, scheme, is based on the pandemic still being in place. So on one hand, he's saying the pandemic's over, but then a lot of his executive departments are saying, no, Mr. President, it's not over, because we would lose a lot of power if the pandemic were to come to an end. A lot of governors, too, are still claiming that the pandemic is not over because it allows them to wield their executive, emergency powers as long as they want. So, I think most American people do think that the pandemic is over. However, like I tell you, Donnie, this morning when I was, getting ready for work, I see kids walking around with masks on outside while they're getting ready for the bus. So I still think that a lot of people are not, are not on board with the pandemic being over because they're getting such mixed messages. And this is just another example of it. Biden says it's over on 60 Minutes. And then, the next day, Dr. Fauci comes out and says, no, it's not over. Karine Jean-Pierre comes out and says, no, it's not over. So the American people are confused.
Yeah, Jim, what do you think? Because we can go through all the different agencies, all the different governors, all the different government structures or media, and all the skin that they have in the game for perpetuating this idea that the pandemic isn't over and that it's going to go on forever. But why would Biden say that then? What do you think, Jim?
I think he said that because, I don't know, he believes it. That could be because of that, because he accidentally said the truth.
Right.
I don't know what story you read. Was it 400 or 500 people dying with COVID? Well, let's just even say they died of COVID. To which I say, because I'm a heartless jerk, so what? It doesn't. How many people die in car accidents every day? How many people die from, an accident, falling off a ladder every day, or gun violence and all that stuff? 500, 400.
How about fentanyl?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Now that's even that actually is a real big crisis. But, the reason this is important, and you mentioned the whole student loan giveaway debacle, $500 billion was predicated on the fact that we're still in a COVID emergency, but we obviously have not been in a COVID emergency for at least a year. But there are still 10 states that have declared COVID emergencies for which their governors have emergency power to basically rule as dictators. Those are California, Connecticut, Delaware, Washington, Minnesota, Texas, Illinois, Kansas, West Virginia, and Rhode Island. So just last week, it was the 34th time our governor, J.B. Pritzker, extended his emergency. He has spent 69% of his time in office under emergency COVID power. It's absurd, and these things need to end. And that's why him slipping out the truth that we no longer have a COVID emergency. There needs to be put pressure on, especially those 10 state governors and everyone else, to end these emergency powers. They have to go because it's tyrannical. It's not the way our government is supposed to operate.
Cameron, we are very, very short on time, but if you have anything to add to this topic of discussion, now's your opportunity.
I actually think the reason everybody wants him to not say the pandemic is over, I think it's actually far more insidious. And it is his ability and penchant to govern and to legislate without Congress. Congress does not do much. They're not doing much because that's the way the system's designed. And that system frustrates a liberal agenda. And that liberal agenda is big spending on teachers, on public sector unions that like to build roads, that like to that work for the schools, their government employees. To declare the pandemic over means the spigot's going to get turned off sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
Donnie, I also think that this has election ramifications because, as we know, in 2020, they loved their mail-in ballots and they loved all the pandemic restrictions and how they impacted the election.
Yeah, which all facilitated the freest and most fair election of all time. We got to make sure to say that.
Of course.
Thank you, our host YouTube. oh yeah, we got to say that. All right, we're already pretty much at the end of the show, so I want to thank everyone for joining us for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. Audio-only listeners that are catching this on a Friday, join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time. We are streaming on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and Rumble. You can join the conversation, put your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll refer to your questions, respond to your questions on the fly. Please hit that subscribe button, hit that share button on this content, leave a comment underneath the video if you're watching on YouTube. All of these things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. If you would like, you could follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on soon-to-be freer Twitter, at HeartlandInst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
And Cameron Sholty, where can the fine people find work from you in government relations and the like?
On Twitter, at HeartlandGR. Thanks again for having me, guys, everybody.
Oh, thank you for joining us. And Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
StopInSocialism.com. We are giving you the inside info on some of the crazy socialist candidates the left is running for office this November, and I think it will really blow your mind.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.